Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Mallory Miller, and I am the Assistant Director of the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. I'm very thankful to be welcoming some of our community members to chat with us today. Our conversation is going to focus on manifestations of white privilege, white supremacy, systemic oppression, and resources for being on a journey of anti-racism, and really just kind of personal experiences of being on that journey. So I have a faculty member and two students joining today, and I will let them introduce themselves, and then I will kind of begin with a prompt. So let's start with our faculty person, Jen.
Hi, thanks, Mallory. Thanks for inviting us today. Appreciate that. My name is Jen Lindrum. I am assistant professor of sociology, and I am new at Aquinas. I just finished my first year. And I taught race and ethnicity last semester, and I'll be teaching it again in the fall. And as a sociologist, a lot of what we do is we talk about race and ethnicity and gender and sexuality. And so this is a big part of our regular ongoing conversations, race and racism and systemic racism.
Thanks, Jen. Mikayla?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mikayla Jones. I was a diversity assistant this past year and worked with Mallory, and I'll be a junior in this upcoming year at Aquinas and also an RA. And I'm really happy and thankful for the invitation from Mallory to be a participant in this conversation, and that my voice is being heard and all of our voices are being heard, and that we can open this safe but much needed dialogue to start this conversation, and happy to be here.
And Tess.
Hi, I'm Tess. I am a junior at Aquinas. I'm right now studying business and art, and I work at Lions and Rabbits Studios downtown Grand Rapids. Through my work, I work a lot in the community and kind of getting involved. So I'm really glad to be sitting in on this conversation as well.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate it. Okay, so we're gonna get started with our first prompt. What do you consider to be the most pressing issue or issues regarding racial inequality in the United States today?
Who would like to start? Mikayla or Tess? Or
one thing that comes to mind for me, I think education is a big one. And I think for education, it's multifaceted, like not having all the resources needed for students, especially if it's like in urban areas or communities with higher minorities. But then also I feel like there's not a lot of representation for like Black students. Like growing up, I remember at my high school, there weren't like a lot of Black teachers at my school. And then there weren't a lot of like mentors there to say like, you can do this, like you're smart enough and have the ability to do this. And I feel like sometimes there might be favorite students, but those usually aren't like the minority or Black students. And so I feel like those resources are very important just to help students feel like they're appreciated, they're needed, and their skills and abilities are there and that they can manifest them and be whoever they want to be. And I think that's really important.
I totally agree. That is definitely an area that needs to be focused on more. I too think that the white privilege, I don't think it's talked about enough. I don't think there's enough education on what it is, and that I think there's a lot of misinformation about it.
about white privilege, about what it is, and all of the things. So what do you think?
Yes. Sorry, about like what white privilege is, what it looks like. I think a lot of people, at least from my experience and having conversations with people, they think that it's simply just being racist, when really it has a lot to do with how you're treated because you're white or because you aren't white.
And I think it's important to note, like, white privilege doesn't make you a bad person. It's just something that's there, that exists, that we should acknowledge, so then we can move forward and like, okay, since I know that this is happening, I know that it exists, how can I move forward from here and try to like either like maybe minimize the effects or even just like help other people who are negatively affected by it or who don't benefit from it. I think that's an important step too.
So true.
Given where we are right now with this national and global unrest with the racial tensions and recent police brutality and continued violence, systemic violence, a lot of these conversations around race are happening. And I'm wondering then if the two of you are having these kinds of conversations about white privilege among your peers and friends and family members.
I actually, I made a post kind of on Instagram, like talking about white privilege on my story. And then I said, if anyone has any questions or wants to open a conversation, you can talk to me. And I had one of my high school friends, who I'm still really close with, reach out to me. And she was like, I took a sociology class last year in college, and I actually just learned what white privilege is. So I would love to have resources. And that made me feel really great that she was willing to like open up and learn about it and learn what it is, and like realize, okay, like this is a thing, but I want to try to do what I can. And that really made me happy. And I, like you were saying, Tess, I feel like it should be talked about even more at like the high school level, because it's like such a real thing, but so many people can go like a long time without even realizing that it exists. And I think it takes a while to kind of come to terms with it as well, like mentally and emotionally. So having that time as well to like kind of let it sit and then realize, oh, this is a real thing, like a real concept that happens, I think is important too.
Yeah, for sure. And in my experience, I took a class with Jen last semester, and I wrote a paper on white privilege and started educating myself on the subject. And so I'd go to my friends and talk to them about it, and they'd be like, oh, well, yeah, that's great, but it's such a, it has so much background on it that I think a lot of people are scared to get into it. So I was kind of shoved off. But after all of the protests started happening and our nation started focusing on it, I've noticed that my friends and my family have started opening up to the idea and actually researching it themselves. And then also like coming to me and being like, okay, well, like I see where you were coming at. And kind of, I also try to stress that, like what you said, it does not make you a bad person if you have white privilege. It just means that you need to find a way to like use it in a good way, kind of.
So I think it's interesting, my Jen's question and then the prompt, the most pressing issue, and then are you talking about this in your, you know, various circles of relationships? It almost makes me feel like the most pressing racial inequality is, it almost stems from the fact that whiteness is not recognized, it's not discussed, there's not an ownership of whiteness in our country. I think you've both made great points where, you know, for white folks, you might first, you know, reconcile yourself with your whiteness, or even think about that in college when a professor is asking you to, you know, read something new or dig into new material. And you've gone your entire existence not engaging with that part of your identity in a conscious way. I mean, you've certainly engaged with it in how you move through the world, right? But you're not aware of that. And so I almost think, because we know that so many of these other inequalities stem from that single issue of white social groups, white families, white people being unable to recognize their racial identity, the power and privilege associated with that, and almost a refusal, absolutely a refusal. And we've kind of created a culture of politeness around whiteness, right? Like we, you know, it's not the polite thing to talk about things like that. That's uncomfortable. Those were ancestors a long time ago that did bad things. We're in a different place now. Like we don't want to bring that up. And so because of that polite silence that we've created, we pass that on generationally. And we're just pushing these issues onto the next generation again and again and again. We're not reconciling with things and racist systems that we've codified into law because it's not polite to do so. And so we pass on our silence. And it creates a sense of fragility in whiteness, right? And we know there's a lot out there about white fragility. And, you know, as soon as someone brings it up, you get defensive and you want to make that statement like, I'm not a bad person, right? And I think that is really an expression of our fragility. And when I say our, I'm talking about my community of affluent white folks, right? Our fragility in moving through our racial identity and the history that's embodied in that. And I think if we could do a better job of that through education, like you say, Mikayla, right? Like through police, rethinking our policing systems that we know have been codified in racism, right? Rethinking housing and all of these things. It's like a many-headed beast, but I think at the core of that animal is a white community's inability or fragility in discussing a racial identity and the historical past connected to that and the ways that we see that manifested today. So I'm almost thinking like my answer for the question would be, for both Jen's question and the prompt, is I kind of feel like that's the most pressing issue, because so many other groups of people who do not identify as white, they do talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
You know, there's a strategy for how to move across the world. They're talking about our whiteness, but we are not.
Right.
And so I think that is sort of the crux of the issue, that then manifests itself in a lot of different ways in society that, you know, you're trying to play whack-a-mole. It's like, oh, let me just try and fix this one and then maybe this one, but we're never dealing with, you know, what's underneath the surface, you know, where those
like putting a Band-Aid over it instead of like getting to the root of the issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I sort of picture white supremacy then as in this Venn diagram at the center, and then you have all of these issues like education, white privilege coming out of white supremacy, and then all of the other areas that are enforced by various institutional presence that continue to uphold white supremacy and negatively impact people of color. I was thinking about one of the things I think I ask students in my classes is to think about the first time that they recognized their race. And this is a very different experience with students depending on their race or ethnicity or how they identify and how they experience the world. And what often happens is that white folks, myself included, we might have an isolated experience, or it might not be until much later where we're recognizing our race. So it's a very different experience than other people of color might experience this for the first time. What those experiences and memories look like.
Yeah.
But I mentioned that as a sort of exercise to think about, to get in touch with white privilege, to access that white guilt, that white fragility, and white denial, quite frankly.
Yeah. One of my hopes, and I think it's been an interesting journey these past 2 weeks, certainly, because I think initially I felt a lot of anger and hopelessness and, you know, disappointment and frustration when the news first broke about the murder of George Floyd, and then Breonna Taylor, and then even a month or two ago, Ahmaud Arbery, and just being really frustrated by the circumstances surrounding that, because it kind of seems like we've been talking about this forever, for decades, right? I had an interesting conversation the other day, and I was like, someone was like, yeah, it just seems like we're hearing about this a lot. And I was like, I don't know, or a lot more now is what their point was making. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I think we've been hearing the same story for a decade, 2 decades. I mean, if you really think about it, for forever. You know, I mean, we were talking about police brutality in 91 or something with Rodney King.
And yeah, and even before that to 1967 during the Detroit uprising and other cities were participating in this, the main reason for these uprisings has historically been racial tensions. The Kerner report that was produced from 1967 uprising recommended that we address all of these issues around racial inequality, education, police, housing, and employment. think there might be one other area, but those issues remain unaddressed
Yeah.
over 50 years later.
Yeah. And to me, I feel like it's because there's an inability to engage from the white community. Like, oh, that's such a terrible thing that happened. But then, you know, we talk about it one time at the dinner table and then it's over with, right? You know, the communities that have been suffering this violence and oppression, they've been talking about it. They talk about it a lot, right? Like they strategize for it with their young children, which is horrifying to think about. And I will say, I think, so maybe last week I was feeling that hopelessness, right? In the last couple days, I'm daring to be a little more optimistic because I do think I am seeing people in my community who have never talked about these issues before. I think they're talking about it, right? And I'm seeing a lot of things on social media about, oh, you know, this is a book I'm reading, or, you know, this is a Facebook group I'm joining, you know, this is a conversation that I'm trying to have, this is a donation that I made. And so I think that makes me hopeful because it is really remarkable that my family talked for 2 hours on our weekly Zoom call last week about police brutality, and that has never happened before. And each one of us is on a totally different journey with our whiteness and anti-racism, and we're at very different points. But I just kind of was like, wow, we just talked about that, and we've never talked about that before. And I'm hopeful that that's happening in other places. Now, I think the key is going to be, how do we continue talking about this when we all go back on Instagram to posting, like, you know, what we did this weekend or the food that we made, or, you know, all those things. I think that will be a really essential piece to pushing this work farther and hopefully changing the narrative. And that's a lot of work that the white community needs to do. And so I'm curious about if that work will continue to happen. And maybe, you know, have you had a similar or a different experience in your circles? You know, are you feeling like, oh, I think maybe people are talking about things and they're going to make some, you know, they're going to do some significant self-education and maybe make some change? Or are you kind of like, I don't know, I'm still wary about it? I'm just curious on maybe what you all think.
For me, I am starting to get hopeful. I have been working on the GR Windows project downtown Grand Rapids, where we are painting or trying to paint all the boards, and not as much cover up the message that the boards, because when the riots happened, the boards came up and covered up the glass. And we're not trying to like beautify the area. It's not a beautification project. We're trying to continue the message that the riots sent, trying to keep that going, keep the conversation flowing. So that's making me hopeful. And just seeing the community come together and work together to finish this project has been great.
I think for me, I'm still like on the fence about everything and kind of want to see how it plays out. Like how Mallory was saying, I want this to be like a long-term thing that we keep talking about, or we just keep still in the front of our minds, like this is still happening and we still need progress toward finding ways to improve the system and finding ways to put like laws and things in place in order to help people in these communities. And it's been a little concerning because I like when we had like the blackout on Instagram, that was a little like mixed for me in a way, because it's like I've never like seen anyone post anything and then they just posted for the blackout and then I haven't seen them post anything since. And then also like if people didn't link any resources or information, it's literally just posting a black screen and blocking out the other useful information. But I'm still hopeful that, because I have seen a lot of other people post resources and constantly, consistently post, and I really appreciate that. And like that is being seen. I've had people reach out to me and say like, hey, are you okay? Like, how are you doing? And that's reassuring as well. And I just hope that we can keep this going and that it doesn't like end after like a month or two or after the summer, and that we can see change. And I think it's also inspiring though to see how much the country has come together like across the world as well as the US. And I think that's really cool as well.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that all of this is happening during COVID too.
Yeah.
Right, that have just showed these mass cleavages between communities and the kinds of access to healthcare and the health conditions in communities of color versus in other communities, and how that looks. Yeah, I've also been seeing this in my social network with people are asking, people who wouldn't previously have been engaging in a conversation are doing so now, asking questions, the sharing of resources, including how to talk about race with children or at various ages at adolescence versus with you all in college in a different context in adults. Sorry, that's Harriet. And then also different approaches in whether it be books or articles or podcasts, different modes getting this kinds of access, produced by people of color, produced by other folks, depending on where someone is at in their journey, as you talked about this, Mallory, where we all are in our journey of race and anti-racist strategies. So I think I would recommend sort of whatever resonates with anyone individually, because there's still a lot of this divisiveness happening, and it's sort of like this black and white thinking, that it's black versus white, and this really continues to pit us against one another instead of all coming together and being vulnerable and sharing experiences and asking questions and creating safe and open spaces like these to have these conversations in ways that we can begin to normalize race and racism, and maybe move toward at some point and the ideology of being colorblind in a society that would foster that happening, where we are not segregated by race in such extreme ways as we are today.
And maybe like if we get to that point, / hopefully when we get to that point, we'll like as a country come together like and have better communication, better like ways of being empathetic toward one another, toward different communities that are separate from ours, but like we're all one people, like we're all human. And I feel like that should kind of be at the core of everything. And it's like if this was happening to like someone, like I love someone I knew, like how would I feel? Like just putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And I feel like having those conversations, like you were saying, is so important. And then if we can like build those skills of communicating, that can probably help us in the future with other endeavors that happen as well. So yeah.
And I think I agree with everything that you're saying, Mikayla. I think too that Mallory, in response to your feeling hopeless recently, last week you said, I think that many of us have been experiencing that too, with some waves of hope in there. But I think that it's important to remember that we can, even these like micro level interactions one-on-one with neighbors across the street or on porches or in parking lots, these interactions are meaningful when we have conversations with someone we might not have like normally have a conversation with, but now we're asking questions, or maybe now we're more consciously making eye contact behind our masks, but we're doing that deliberately to connect with other folks who don't necessarily look like us. These things really matter.
I think that's a great point. And I find that when I focus more on the immediate or my small circle of influence, that I am more able to receive that feeling of, okay, I think I did good work here today. I think we made a connection. You know, I think this seems like there's some movement there. You know, maybe we're making some progress, or I threw out a challenge that was good and I felt like it was received, right? When it's in those more localized, smaller settings. It's when I look at the big numbers. It's when I look at nationwide. It's when I kind of read those national stories that I'm like, oh, you know, I just feel like we are doing the same thing again and again and again, and we're not learning from it, right? So maybe that leads me into another prompt, which would be, how do you process and what kind of work are you doing individually with yourself, either to be on a journey of anti-racism? So like, what in your everyday, where are you in that process? Or I would say, how are you empowering yourself despite living in a society of racist oppression, systemic oppression, right? So those would be kind of my two questions that I would throw out. So like, for me as a white lady, I'm thinking about that question, like, what am I doing to manifest in my area where I control, in my sphere of influence, and in myself, my journey of anti-racism, that makes me feel that sense of like, yes, okay, let's keep going. That this is hard, this is challenging, but it's meaningful, so I'm going to keep going. Or I think it's important, especially for people who might be watching this, our students, staff, and faculty, especially of color, where are you seeking opportunities to be empowered despite the reality of the world that we live in and the systems that we move through, right? So those are kind of maybe the next question I want us to think about and converse about together.
Kayla, Tess, would you like to jump in?
I can start. I'd just say that for me, I'm definitely trying to continue educating myself, and going back to white privilege, like working through the white guilt and not putting it on other people, just putting it on myself and educating myself about the white privilege that I hold and recognizing it when it happens in the moment. Also continuing conversation with people and listening and really hearing people's stories and issues. And, you can't, it's not as much as like trying to help, but just listen and like understand.
For me, it's hard because it's still like a process that I'm kind of emotionally and mentally working through. Like, I don't really have a perfect, like, clear-cut answer of I've been doing this and it's worked perfectly throughout this entire process, because it's been really scary, especially because like in 2020 alone, there have been so many instances, and those are only the ones that are like recorded, those are the ones that are getting media attention. There's other instances that aren't recorded, that aren't recognized, and then there's still people who are out there who haven't been charged yet for the things they've done. But honestly, for me, it's really helping able to like talk to friends and family about what's going on and have honest conversations, because I feel like that kind of validates how I'm feeling, and it's just an honest conversation, and we can understand each other better and also try to move towards like a better place and also grow and learn in the process. So that's really helped me. And also seeing like the protests and everyone assembling together to like fight for what they believe in, like in the capital and the different cities, I think has been empowering for me as well. Just seeing different people from different backgrounds coming together and supporting one another and supporting this issue that we're facing in the country right now is empowering for me as well. I'm trying to think of other things that have helped, but those are the two, I think, main things for me. And also like taking a step back from like social media at times to just not, but then also I'm trying to like be a resource to people if they want to talk or have a conversation as well and be there for them. But I think just balancing that out as well for me.
Yeah, that's great and thinking about balancing and limiting social media time right now, but also allowing yourself to be a reference, to be available, to be a resource. Well, as a sociologist, I've been training my entire career to dismantle systems of oppression. And so I'm energized right now for the momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement. But you know, Black Lives Matter has been going on since Ferguson, since 2013. But this does feel different. A lot of things are happening at once, and it's national, it's global, it's during a global pandemic. These are all important points. And it does feel like we have some momentum because the politicians are hearing from their constituents that we want change and we are demanding change. And a lot of white people that have been previously silent are not being silent anymore and recognizing the danger and violence of that silence. So for me, I would just say I'm empowered by going to the protest. That's the kind of person that I am. I like to rally together people, and community is really important to me. And I've had a lot of conversations with young folks your age, Tess and Mikayla, and I'm inspired and hopeful by your generation. You all are out there, you're vocal, your inclusivity is important to you. And you are willing to have these difficult conversations with your family members and friends when they aren't looking at things in these equitable terms. Yeah. So thank you for all you're doing. You all inspire me. I'm motivated and inspired by and empowered by you all.
Yeah, I would echo that, Jen. Absolutely. I think when we work in higher education, we get just such a beautiful opportunity to really see the sparks of what will be a fire of change in the future that not everyone in their profession gets. You know, I think educators, we are very, very fortunate to get to work with amazing students like you two. I think, you know, I've been doing a lot of thinking and emotional wrestling with where I am on my journey of anti-racism and really, really critically investigating like myself. You know, I think it's easy, particularly because of, you know, my educational background and the work that I get to do, to be like, you know, nice job, you're doing it, you're doing all the right things, like you're not a part of the problem, you know. But that just isn't true. I am still, and it is not something that gets easier, and it's not something that gets to be completed. You know, I think for who I am in my identities and the many, many ways that they embody just the utmost privilege and power that our society has to offer, it's a lifelong thing for me. And sometimes that feels overwhelming. I think some of the ways that concretely I've been really trying to dig deeper in these last 2 weeks and think about, okay, how am I going to keep this as salient to me right now in these 2 weeks? That level of salience, you know, all the way forward. And in, you know, months from now, when we look back and we're like, oh gosh, yeah, you know, I want it to feel very salient. So some of the things I'm thinking about and that I encourage other people to be wrestling with is absolutely, of course, doing the self-education, right? And that encompasses, you know, whatever medium works for you. There are podcasts out there that are awesome. There are books, certainly, documentaries. There are, you know, fictional films that are based in these issues, you know, that are kind of like historical fiction type situation, right? I think the resources are just endless. And in fact, we have worked to compile a list of various mediums we've kind of drawn it from things floating around in social media and just things that Alicia and I really have drawn from recently and in years past. And we're going to be posting that permanently on our website. So it's going to say anti-racism resources, and you can just go there. And hopefully, I'm still working on the IT part, but hopefully that'll be like clickable links, you know, that's super easy. So certainly, I want folks to be doing that. But I also think, if you're somebody that's like, oh yeah, I've read a lot of great things, like I feel like I have a strong foundation in this, then my challenge is for us to put our money where our mouth is, and to really dig deeper, and to take more actionable, more tangible steps to living out the values that we espouse to believe, right? For me, I went to my first ever public forum on policing. And I watched it virtually in my basement, right? Which is pretty darn convenient, but
Counts.
yeah, I can't say that I've ever done that before. And that's not something I'm proud of, right? But I did that, and I submitted a question, and I am waiting for the response from our city manager, right? And that's something that I want to keep my eye on. And I intend to be a regular attendee at city council meetings and at public forums like that, because just like Jen said, I think our legislators and the people in positions of power, I think they are starting to hear from their constituents in a different way. And I want that to continue, and I can be a voice for that. And it does take up giving time, on an evening, but it's worth it, because not doing it is not acceptable to me and where I am on my journey anymore. I would say the same for thinking about how we spend our money. Where is my family putting our resources, and who are those resources supporting? And that is very fraught and super, super difficult. Consumer moralism is, wow, it's very, very hard, because they don't make it easy, and we're not going to get it right every time, but I think we can be more thoughtful about where we are putting our resources, or what organizations we are supporting with subscriptions and with regular donations. That's something where we are in a place to have that conversation. Not everyone is, especially college students. You're just trying to get through the next tuition payment. But I think some of us on our journey, we're in that place. And rightly or wrongly, money speaks loudly. And so I like to think that that's a place that we are trying to be as a family, and I am trying to be on my journey. Other things that I think are really, easy to do: flood your social media with, women of color who inspire you, authors and writers and actors and, activists of color who are doing great work, and are giving their time and energy right now to this movement. If you've seen a post, that was shared, click on the person who shared it, go to the original post, and before you put it in your story, follow them. I think that's a great way to have everyday reminders of this work and conversation, and to really, I think, give time and attention that's very needed to the people who are really owning this work and doing it. And that's as easy as 1 or 2 clicks, and maybe it's not something that you would have thought about, like, oh, my Instagram is for beautiful pictures, and, my Instagram is really about crafting a brand around foods and architecture or whatever I like. What else could it be, is my question to you, right? I have a friend who always says social media is like the bubblegum things in life. It's just the sweet stuff. And I think that can be true. But I think that can also be a little bit of a crutch, right? And so I think we have seen that social media has enabled a lot of activism. It's almost become a messaging tool for people to unite, the way that Jen was saying. And so, how could you be a better ally in that space? Recently, a lot of white women were giving over their Instagrams to women of color, specifically Black women, this last weekend, and just letting their followers just hear the message and amplifying the voice of a Black woman. That's really beautiful. And you don't have to be, a famous actress to do that. I think you can find a way to do that just every day by following different people, or, diversifying the information you're taking in. So I think those are ways that I'm really trying to be thoughtful about how to take some concrete next steps. because if I say it's important, I better live that it's important, right? And you know, we're all in a different place on that journey, but I just think I want us to have some salience around these issues that we're seeing right now in the news, and I want that to continue for several months and years. I think I'll kind of move to our next prompt here, which would be two different questions, kind of two sides of a coin, I think. Where do you find respite from the trauma or emotional work of seeing manifestations of racism and white supremacy? Or where do you find inspiration to continue the work of dismantling systemic oppression? I'll ask again. I'll repeat. They were long questions, and I get that. So I'm kind of thinking about, if we are going to keep this salient and we really are going to do this hard work, it takes energy, right? So how are we going to keep our tank full, right? So where do you find respite from the emotional toll of this kind of work, or experiencing this because of who you are, right? Or where do you find inspiration to keep going? You know, that hope that kind of we mentioned earlier. Where do those things come from?
I think something that has helped me is, like you said before, following people who are Black and inspiring on social media. So like artists or actresses or musicians or literally anything. Or I found this one thing, it was like 9 things that wouldn't be here without Black women. And I thought that was really cool. And it's like everyday products that different people from all different backgrounds and races use. And another thing that I found as well is I really love like movies and music. And I've been watching a lot of like my favorite like full Black casted movies that like inspired me and like make me proud to be Black and like proud of who I am. Because I feel like sometimes with everything going on, you might be like, some people might think, oh, like I wish I was Black, or oh, I wish I wasn't who I am, or I wish I could just like go somewhere else, or things like that. And so I think remembering like who you are and all of the amazing achievements and how far Black people have come and how far we're going to go as well is inspiring. So finding things like that has helped me during this as well, to just like take a break, or also remember like you've got this and like you're awesome. It's a very empowering thing.
I know for me, when because every day something new seems to happen and come up in media, and it's a lot. So I think for me, going to another white person and depacking it and going over it and like expressing how I'm feeling and how that person's feeling has helped a lot. It's been good. Yeah.
I would say mine is similar to yours, Tess. I think certainly I try to do things like nature is really helpful to me. So, you know, getting out in nature and spending time with the people and family that kind of restores me and lets me have a space to just, you know, kind of take a mental, emotional, and physical deep breath. But I think to kind of inspire me is I really try to have both in people I don't know, like on social media, people I follow that I find inspirational, right? Or people that I really do know, friends and colleagues who I feel like are a couple steps ahead of me on their path. And they're like, you know, hey, keep it going. Like, this is what I did. Maybe take this route, right? Like kind of calling back to me on my path and my journey and helping to pull me forward. They pull me forward with inspiration, with assistance and support, but I think they also pull me forward with challenge. Like, oh girl, don't go slipping back. Like, you know, we got stuff on the line here that matters. And I just really appreciate those people that don't let me get lazy, or that when I have been lazy, they're like, excuse me, wake up, let's go, you know, keep it moving. So that's a way that I think I keep getting pulled forward, is just appreciating those people that inspire me to keep moving.
People who keep you accountable are very important because they don't always tell you what you want to hear, but it's what you need to hear, and they have your best interests at heart. So,
Oh yes.
people close.
Oh yeah, girl.
Totally.
Yeah, there are also a lot of lists going around with artists and scholars and music, and also Black-owned businesses. I'm from Detroit, so there's been lists going around of Black-owned businesses in Detroit, Black-owned businesses in West Michigan, including some of my favorite ways to de-stress and to restore myself are yoga practices, and Black-owned studios that you can do virtual classes now online, which is amazing. That's all I have to add
Awesome.
right now, anyway.
So I think as we kind of conclude here, is there just anything, maybe a thought or a question or a challenge or a reaction that kind of has been on your heart or your mind that you feel like you want to give voice to or share at all?
Well, if I may, Angela Davis, you all know Angela Davis. She's a scholar and an activist and an amazing human. Has said that being not a racist is not enough. It's time to be anti-racist. And so, white people, this is the call to white people to use your white privilege as leverage in this movement right now to level the playing field. It's about time. An exercise that is really simple to get into what white privilege might look like for each of us who identify as white is to take the Harvard racial bias test. I don't know, I often do this in my classes with students, and it just offers some insight into the biases that we all have. We all have these biases, whether we're looking at race and ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability versus disability. We have these biases. So just being able to tap into that and acknowledge that is a good first step.
Yeah. Actually, that's one of the resources on our list that we'll be putting on the website. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Oh, nice. Great.
And kind of adding on to what Jen said, like, another way to kind of get the conversation going with friends and family about white privilege, I found, is just TV shows. You don't think that it's going to be about white privilege, and then you watch it and it sparks this conversation between one another, like Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu, or Get Out by Jordan Peele. Just simple, like, movies and TV shows really start conversation and kind of going into how it affects real world. I also would say that kind of just getting through white privilege and acknowledging it and realizing just because you have had hardships in your life doesn't mean that you don't have white privilege either. I know that is a misconstrued concept.
And just following after Tess, I would say for like all my AQ peers to challenge, to stand up for what you believe in, or just challenge yourself to talk to someone with a different perspective than you, and have an open ear, open heart, open mind while you're talking with that person. It can be a family member, it can be a friend, it can be anyone, but just challenge yourself to have that conversation. And I know it can be scary, and I know you think you know what they're going to say already, but challenge yourself to have that dialogue, because you may be surprised with what you get out of it and what the other person gets out of it as well, and how it may affect both of you. So I think that can be very powerful as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a really great place, you know, with each of your pieces of wisdom and challenges to end today. So I just wanted to say, Mikayla, Tess, Jen, Thank you so much. CDIE, you know, this is something that we are continuing to put energy and resources and programming into. You know, we're doubling down because this conversation needed to be had. You know, it has always been needed to be had. And, you know, it's not okay to talk in an echo chamber anymore. You know, I think we have to all dig deeper and find more ways to spread this conversation and wrestle with these issues farther and wider and in the places where it isn't comfortable. And if you watched and this wasn't comfortable, please, you know, reach out to CDIE, certainly to Alicia and myself. You know, we do our very, very, very best to be a place where even if we don't agree, you know, you can ask those questions that you feel like maybe you can't ask anywhere else. And our goal at the end of the day is to help you to be more educated and to just take a first step. And maybe it's such a small, tiny step, but, you know, every journey starts with one. So I just thank you, all three of you, for being here today and lending your experience and your expertise and your knowledge. Like I said, we're working to compile that list and have it up permanently on our website. So as with all kinds of IT things, it takes a little bit of time, but it'll be there for you. Never hesitate to reach out to have these kinds of conversations, and take care in these times. Take very good care, and, you know, keep digging deep, keep doing the work. So thank you all so much. I appreciate it.